Imagine sitting in a dark room, hitting the rewind button on your life, only to watch the same painful scene play out again and again. That moment you knew you should have stopped, but you did it anyway. You promised yourself this time would be different. You swore you learned your lesson. Yet here you are, looking down at the wreckage of another identical mistake, wondering if you are fundamentally broken. I know that feeling of deep, gut-wrenching frustration, the exhaustion of fighting an invisible enemy that always seems to win. What if I told you that the reason you keep repeating the exact same patterns isn't because you lack intelligence or willpower, but because your brain is actively protecting you in a profoundly twisted way? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you decided to join me today for a conversation that needs to happen. Because if you are human, you have definitely experienced this exhausting phenomenon, the Groundhog Day effect of mistakes. We've all been there, swearing off late-night shopping, toxic relationships, or procrastination, only to find ourselves exactly where we started a month later, shaking our heads and asking, why do I do this to myself? This looping pattern feels like a personal flaw. But trust me, it's a deep psychological mechanism, and understanding it is the first crucial step toward truly breaking free from the self-imposed prison of repetition that has held you back for far too long. Think about a time when you made a significant mistake, maybe letting a deadline slip because you procrastinated, or perhaps falling for the exact same manipulative tactics in a new relationship. That immediate feeling of, oh no, I'm doing it again, is so powerful. But what usually happens next? We beat ourselves up, we wallow in shame, and then we quickly try to forget the pain, hoping that simply wanting to change will be enough to prevent the next slip-up. That shame and avoidance, however, are precisely what fuel the cycle. By refusing to engage deeply with the cause, we are guaranteeing the effect will return, sometimes even stronger, because the root issues are never addressed, merely shoved back under the rug until the next triggering event arises. The core issue we need to tackle is the insidious appeal of the familiar. Our brains, fundamentally, are wired for survival and efficiency, meaning they prefer paths that are known, even if those paths lead to predictable pain. When you repeat a mistake, you are reinforcing a deeply grooved neural pathway that was established long ago. And while it might be dysfunctional, it feels safe and predictable because your brain already knows exactly what the outcome is going to be. Change, on the other hand, is unknown territory. It represents potential failure, risk, and the expenditure of immense cognitive energy, which the brain is constantly trying to conserve, thus leading it to choose the comfortable misery over the challenging growth we desperately crave. This brings us directly to the first major psychological hurdle: identity. Many of us unwittingly create an identity around our failures. Subconsciously, we start believing things like, I am the type of person who is bad with money, or I am the person who always screws up relationships. When you adopt this narrative, even your attempts to succeed are undermined because deep down, success conflicts with your established self-concept, and your mind will subtly self-sabotage to keep the world consistent with the flawed identity you've constructed. To truly change the loop, you have to initiate a radical change in self-perception, moving away from who you were when the mistake was made, and firmly stepping into the identity of the person who learns, evolves, and overcomes these specific challenges. Now, let's talk about the mechanics of the mistake itself. When the repetitive mistake occurs, we usually focus on the immediate action, the splurge, the argument, the missed workout. We analyze the what but totally neglect the crucial why. The mistake is almost never about the surface behavior. It's a symptom of an underlying emotional need or an unmanaged trigger. Did you splurge because you felt deeply stressed at work and needed a quick dopamine hit? Did you argue because you felt unheard and reverted to a childhood defense mechanism? until you dissect the emotional landscape that preceded the error. You are just treating the flu with a Band-Aid. It looks better for a moment, but the infection remains and will inevitably flare up again. This is where emotional literacy becomes your superpower. Most repeated mistakes are not logical failures. They are emotional responses that went unchecked. Fear, stress, inadequacy, or deep-seated shame are the true architects of repetition. When we are triggered, our prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic and future planning, takes a back seat, and the amygdala, the reactive, fight-or-flight center, grabs the steering wheel. To stop the cycle, you need to learn how to interrupt that automatic emotional cascade and regain conscious control. A challenging but totally achievable skill that fundamentally rewires how you react to stressful or tempting situations in real time. For many, the root of this sensitivity lies in unresolved trauma or painful experiences from the past. These aren't always big T traumas. Sometimes they are small, consistent hurts that programmed us to react defensively in certain specific situations. If you were constantly criticized as a child, an innocent critique from your boss might trigger a full-blown self-sabotage response, causing you to quit or slack off because that deep, old wound feels fresh and overwhelming, leading you to repeat the pattern of quitting before you can be rejected again. These old ghost behaviors linger, and recognizing their shadowy influence is critical for moving forward and understanding why that seemingly minor trigger causes such a disproportionate, mistake-laden reaction every single time. So, how do we break this insidious cycle? We start by implementing a crucial pause button. The moment you feel the familiar urge, the creeping anxiety, or the sudden need for instant gratification that precedes your mistake, you must institute the stop, observe, wait rule. Stop what you're doing physically. Observe what you're feeling internally. Label the emotion. Is it fear? Boredom? Loneliness? Then, and this is the hardest part, wait. Do nothing for 10 minutes. This simple interruption disrupts the automated neural pathway and gives your logical brain the necessary window to climb back into the driver's seat before the self-sabotage maneuver is complete. After the mistake has inevitably happened. Because we are imperfect human beings and learning is messy, you must ditch the shame and conduct what I call the after-action review, AAR. This is a clinical, non-judgmental look at the failure, treating it like a scientist treating data. The AAR requires you to write down, what was the trigger? What were my feelings just before the action? What conscious thought led me to proceed? And most importantly, what single small decision could I have made differently right at the critical turning point? Allowing you to isolate the specific moment of failure and create a precise prevention plan for the next time the identical scenario arises in your life. The should focus entirely on the process of decision-making, not the result. The result is just noise. The process is the lesson. For example, if you overspent, don't just write down, I spent too much money. Instead, detail, I chose to open the shopping app while I was emotionally exhausted and hungry, violating my rule of never shopping when my energy is low. This deep level of process analysis allows you to build a system of defense around your vulnerability, recognizing that the weakness isn't the spending itself, but the vulnerable state you allowed yourself to enter before the spending even became possible. Providing a clearer path to sustainable change, we also have to change how we define failure. Most people see failure as a definitive end, a confirmation of their incompetence. But truly successful people view failure as essential data. Every repeated mistake gives you increasingly specific information about your vulnerabilities and internal structure, information you literally couldn't gain otherwise. When you reframe failure this way, as a costly but invaluable piece of necessary data, you remove the emotional charge that locks you into the cycle of shame, making it possible to analyze the error with curiosity rather than crippling self-condemnation. which is vital for genuine growth. Breaking the massive loop requires building momentum in the opposite direction. And this is achieved through the power of small wins. Don't try to fix everything at once. If your repeated mistake is chronic procrastination, start by committing to just 5 minutes of focused work every single day, no exceptions. That tiny success builds confidence, reinforces the identity of a successful person, and slowly starts to carve a new, functional neural pathway in your brain that counteracts the old, destructive one, proving to your skeptical mind that change is possible and manageable without overwhelming stress or drastic, unsustainable effort that usually leads back to the familiar failure point. One of the most underestimated tools in this journey is external accountability. Our blind spots are called blind spots for a reason. We cannot see them. Having a trusted friend, mentor, or professional who knows your repeated mistake pattern can provide crucial visibility during those critical trigger moments. They can gently intercept you, reminding you of your commitment before the familiar slide begins. Or they can help you conduct that AAR without the emotional filtering that we all naturally apply when we are trying to protect our ego. Making their unbiased perspective an essential mirror for true self-awareness and systematic correction. We must also talk about the heavy burden of shame. If you continue to punish yourself for past errors, you keep those errors psychologically alive and dominant, making them more likely to repeat because you are essentially reliving the painful experience, reinforcing the negative emotional state that fueled the mistake in the first place. Forgiveness isn't about excusing the behavior. It's about acknowledging the past, extracting the lesson, and consciously releasing the emotional baggage so that your future decisions are made from a place of clarity and growth, rather than from the reactive, defensive posture of a wounded past self that is constantly trying to compensate. Furthermore, environment is destiny. If your repeated mistake involves scrolling endlessly on your phone, but you keep your phone by your bedside table, you are designing your environment to facilitate failure. If your social circle encourages the toxic behavior you are trying to quit, you are setting yourself up to fail. You need to meticulously audit your physical, digital, and social environments and ruthlessly eliminate or redesign the cues and triggers that constantly invite you back into the familiar, painful loop, understanding that willpower is finite. But a well-designed environment is an almost unlimited source of support. A highly effective technique for long-term change is visualizing your future self. When faced with the urge to make the same old mistake, stop and ask yourself, what decision would the improved, successful version of me, the future me, make right now? This shifts the decision-making context from the immediate, impulsive present to the long-term desired identity. Using aspiration as a guide rather than relying solely on exhausted willpower, allowing you to leverage the emotional pull of who you want to become over the familiar gravity of who you have been in the past. Ultimately, mastering the art of breaking repetitive mistakes is the mastery of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. It moves you from a state of constant reacting, where external triggers dictate your behavior, to a state of thoughtful responding, where you choose your actions aligned with your highest values. This shift requires dedication, practice, and patience. But it is the difference between living life on autopilot and taking the reins of your own destiny, transforming your life from a painful loop into a constantly evolving upward spiral of genuine achievement and fulfillment. So, friend, please understand that you are not broken. You are simply running an old, outdated program that was designed long ago. And like any good programmer, you now have the tools and the power to go back into the source code of your life and rewrite the script. It requires facing the uncomfortable truths in your AR, implementing those crucial pauses, and designing a world where success is easier than failure. But the payoff is absolute freedom from the exhausting prison of repeated regrets. You have the strength, Now you just need the strategy to finally execute that long-awaited, permanent breakthrough. If this conversation resonated with you, if you're ready to finally close the door on those repeated mistakes and step into your full potential, please let me know down in the comments below what mistake you are committed to breaking this week. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found this insightful. Subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into self-mastery. And share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they are not alone in this fight. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.